All right, guys. So we've got another episode of the Growth by Shawn podcast, and I'm here with Andrew Coates today. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm great, Shawn. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. No, I appreciate you taking the time for me. So normally how I like to start the podcast is just a little bit about your background, either kind of how you got into the health and fitness industry, or maybe how you got into writing as a whole. So I feel like we could go either direction that you want to go with.
It's a part of the story, so I'll try to be succinct with this. So I like speaking in the metaphors with books. So if anybody's familiar with the book "So Good So Good They Can't Ignore You" by Cal Newport, it's sort of this debunking of the passion hypothesis. And if you're not familiar with it, well, I'll try to explain. So I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree from Memorial University in Newfoundland, back east where I'm originally from. I'm in Edmonton, Alberta, and I wasn't really fulfilled by a lot of the stuff that was going on in St. John's. There wasn't a lot of opportunity. And I moved out to Edmonton at 28, was working in other industries, always devoted to gyms. I really got serious about lifting at 24. I'd always played sports. And then at 32, some of the staff and a manager at this old gym that I worked out at, kept bugging me to come and work there as a trainer. Initially, I said no. But, after a few attempts, I said, okay, well, I'm, disillusioned with what else I was doing. So let's give this a shot. Felt completely overwhelmed the first week, but somehow stuck with it. Had some misconceptions about how busy the average trainer was. So just put my head down and worked really hard. And very quickly, I was the busiest trainer at this facility and one of the busiest in the company. And then I found a love and a passion for something that I found myself just in that circumstance versus being this 20-year-old kid fresh out of a program, passionate about training people. And there's nothing wrong with that, but my path was a different one. And then that was several years, I think 6 years, working in that commercial facility, lots of sessions, lots of experience, learning everything I could get my hands on from a lot of well-known educators in the fitness industry, reading a lot of stuff like T Nation. And I left the company to go private, independently contracted at another friend of mine's gym, had my own business, and that did well. And I started traveling, going to the US for fitness conferences where I met a lot of the industry, a lot of the who's who. I started a podcast with a friend back then, and that has done extraordinarily well over the years. And then those connections led to deeper and deeper connections across the industry to where I was eventually invited to start writing for T Nation. I've been writing for my own website. I was very passionate about the idea of just expanding my craft of writing. I knew it would be valuable. So that turned into T Nation. Then, of course, you get out in that space, and then that leads to Generation Iron and eventually some other things. I've written for Jonathan Goodman, my friend's the Personal Trainer Development Center, and then Barbend, and most recently Muscle and Fitness Magazine. And again, those connections and going to these events has turned into opportunities to speak at these events. So, kind of getting on that side of the educational spectrum in the industry, which is fulfilling. It's really fun. And all of that stuff together, layered in with, just playing around with social media to the point where I kind of figured a few things out and the social media blew up. That all is the forward facing stuff. But at the end of the day, it's still like a lot of hours coaching the client right in front of me. I've expanded online business now, but at the end of the day, I'm still that coach with the client and that's what's most fulfilling. And that's the best part of the job.
So kind of earlier in your career, before you kind of started doing a lot of what you're doing now, what were some of the thoughts and emotions that were going through your mind where you had to look and kind of say, I'm unfulfilled right now, I need to go and make a change? And how'd you start to kind of decide to make that change?
So what particular change are you sort of referring to?
When you were more around the 24 age and you felt unfulfilled with what you were doing.
Does
that make sense?
Yeah. So, I came out of a Bachelor of Commerce degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think, okay, all these sort of business suit and tie type jobs. And really, they were mostly just frontline sales jobs. I'd worked for a bank, for example, but really you're just a salesperson. And, kudos to anybody who thrives in that environment, but it wasn't for me. And then I ended up in the bar business, and that runs in my family. So I owned a nightclub, a martini bar, which some people know, some people don't. And that comes with an array of trouble, fun and trouble, which led to an out of control partying lifestyle. We're talking about like, sitting down and having beers, drinks with Collective Soul in the upstairs of my bar one particular night. And that lifestyle gets old after a while. So I just decided, I want to change the scenery. I kind of want to leave this stuff behind. And that led to crossing the country. And I'd been really devoted to the gym, but, through the move and just some of the crazy lifestyle stuff, I'd gotten away from it a little bit. So coming out to Edmonton, it was important that I got back in touch with that. And so I just dedicated myself to it, dove into it. I had a job. I started out with a job working as a poker dealer, poker manager in a casino, which again, I was quite good at, but it wasn't long-term fulfilling. And at the end of my night shifts, I would go to a 24-hour gym and go work out. And so that became the priority. And all along the way, in some form or another, I think just fitness, I wrote something about this recently. It gives you a sense of control over your outcome and other aspects of life because you see, hey, if I put energy and effort into this, then I can change my outcome. And so you gain confidence in being able to do that in other aspects of your life, whether it's career or you name it. And again, it was one of these things that I didn't seek out. It found me. And I look back and kind of laugh about it. It's like, there's a lot of interesting events along the way that, ultimately led to this and some rough times and bad experiences that without those, I wouldn't be where I am right now. So when people always ask, hey, if you could go back in time and, give yourself a piece of advice or do one decision differently, I'd be like, not a chance in hell. Because, you change one thing and you completely pull the pin on everything that came afterwards. So it's the best answer I got for you.
Yeah, no, that works. I'm like in a similar type of position. I bartend right now, and it's weird because when you're in that environment, it's very easy to go and say, all right, well, we're going out for drinks after work. It's midnight. It's hard to say no sometimes. But then you think about it and you're like, okay, well, tomorrow I do want to get up early. I want to go and I want to actually get to the gym, things like that. So it's weird to put yourself in one environment, in like kind of both environments. So now that you're writing a lot more, where do you find kind of the like a creative outlook for content?
It's always all around you.
Okay.
Every experience that you have with a client, every time. So this piece of advice I give to aspiring writers. If you work with clients, they're asking questions and you're often explaining the same things, answering the same set of questions, having the same conversations in points along the way. If you remember to capture these ideas and write them down, like even if it's just making a note in between, while you're dealing with a client, just to save it for later and come back to it, you have an entire library of things that you can write up as, at the very least, a set of frequently asked questions that you can have as a folder that you send to people as they ask them, or you can write out as a formal thing on your website. You can take it a step further and systematically take all those questions and expand them into blog form or more detailed formal articles. That can come with filming video demonstrations of exercise that you can embed within the articles. You can upload to a YouTube channel if you choose to do it. And I mean, I don't do that stuff on my own website. It's like, I do that stuff for Testosterone Nation, right? If I'm filming stuff, I'll say, here, I'm going to write an article for them, get paid to do it. And then it's on this library that's still searchable. But there are tons of ideas. And you could say, well, oh, it's all been said before, all been done before. Who cares? Like, I like to say, like, maybe Jordan Syatt or Eric Cressy or someone wrote an article about this, 5-10 years ago or more. All right, well, most of your audience probably won't know who they are or be digging into that, but they're interested in your interpretation, your words. You're not plagiarizing something if you write an article about the same idea as someone else, unless you literally go copy it word for word. It's authentically your voice, your way of explaining it, your way of coaching something, or your philosophy around some sort of aspect of nutrition or habit or lifestyle change. So there's no reason not to do this, because what's the worst thing that happens? You share it with a few clients and you gain some practice with the skill of writing. Or maybe just through your travels and interactions, it catches the eye of someone, which is kind of what happened in my case. Or you just develop bigger relationships to where people are interested in what you have to say. You've developed the skill of writing, and then you're in a position to perhaps write for a bigger publication. And you could reverse engineer it and say, that's my goal. I want to go and write for this particular whatever, because that's a career fulfilling ambition I have. And then, well, what are the steps to get there? You reverse engineer it back down to develop the skills. A lot of these websites, I mean, it's not even that you necessarily need to facilitate the relationships. It's not a bad idea. But sometimes some of the guys who popped up on T Nation just simply put together work. They worked on some good ideas. They practiced their craft. They submitted, and it got accepted. They don't accept everything, but if you keep working at it and you're determined and your ideas are good and the quality of your work is good, you'll eventually get these opportunities. I've also had people ask me, how do you get on there? And I say, well, you got to go create a website, and you got to, study writing a little bit and do this and do this. They're like, oh, I don't want to do that. They just want to have an introduction to the editors. Well, sorry, I'm not going to do that, because, you haven't done anything to show me that you're willing to put in the effort.
Mhm.
But it just shows the kind of attitude of someone who wants the shortcuts versus someone who's actually willing to work at it. And there's all this stuff that people see now, but the process and the years that went into getting there is often unseen. It doesn't mean you have to wait that long. You can work very deliberately in that direction, develop the appropriate skills, and keep working at achieving it.
Mm. Now, I know that there's been a lot of work from you over the years to progressively get better at writing and creating content, but was this something that more came naturally to you, or did you really have to work hard at it at first? Like, not trying to take away from the work that you've done in a way,
It's a little from column A, it's a little from column B. I like writing as a kid. I was comfortable with writing, through university, but
Mhm.
it still took turning around and really diving into study of the craft. And, there's a handful of very simple and straightforward things. If you do those things well, it's 80% of the quality of writing, right? And this will be, I'll touch it, like, I don't even know how to explain it properly, give examples, but writing an active voice versus passive voice most of the time,
Mhm.
or getting rid of adverbs, just a lot of that kind of weak language in your writing, and just eliminating unnecessary words and just being really succinct, crisp, and clear in how you write things. And that alone will go a long way towards just improving the quality and the readability of your writing. So, but then you can turn around and study books. I always recommend people read the book On Writing Well by William Zinsser. It's sort of the Bible of writing. Or a more modern equivalent is Everybody Writes by Anne Handley. Great books. Good for the person who's just trying to start out. You'll get a lot from it. And then if those help and you're interested more, then there are more specific books that will further enhance your approach to and your craft as a writer and the experience of being a writer. And then anybody who's listening, just message me on Instagram if you are interested more. I'll give you recommendations based on where you are. I'll always answer messages.
Okay. Now, did you have a lot of mentors when it came to writing, or was it more of you were just finding what worked for you?
Again, sort of. I have never had a specific formal mentor that I had ongoing discussions with to help me develop the craft.
Mhm.
I've always been very self-motivated in going out to find resources, whether it's learning about nutrition, watching old Dr. Lane Norton videos on YouTube, and then getting deeper into stuff and reading his books, or some of Alan Aragon's stuff, or John Berardi, Martin McDonald, the people out there who do great stuff in nutrition, and the training stuff. I mean, the list of people who have learned training stuff is too long I could do an entire episode of me just listing off names. Let me grab my bearings on that thought. But in reading, especially, and I always come back to T Nation because that's the first place I started writing, but it was also the first major resource I started reading. So it's got a special place for me. Then a lot of the people over the years who are the T Nation people are the inspirations for, and, basically role models for the writing. So whether it's, Dean Somerset, who's local here to Edmonton, we used to work for the same company. I've done a lot of his in-person education, but read his stuff on T Nation. Or Ben Bruno, a lot of stuff from Ben Bruno, or Christian Thibodeau, or Tony Gentilcore. Tony and I just submitted something that we built together for T Nation that will be published sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Or my friend Lee Boyce, right? I started out reading his stuff, and then got interacted with him on the internet, and then had him on the podcast, and then met him in person at an event, and then had him speak at an event that I hosted in 2019. And now dude's texting me today, right? So it's kind of weird how these things progress. You go from learning someone's coursework to actually sitting down and having dinner with them in person, right? And that's true of Dr. Pat Davidson recently, and Dr. Mike Isertel, for the last several years, or everybody in between. So you got to embrace and lean into those things as well. But it's not so much specific direction and mentorship from those people, but it is the interactions. I sat down with Nick Tuminello and Max Schenk at 2 different events to dinner, talking about writing. And these are 2 guys who are old school T-Nation guys, and just pushes and nudges and encouragement, and it just lights a fire under you. So there have been those conversations, but no, I've never had a quote writing mentor. There are people in the industry who teach writing, but nobody to the point where I've really dove into their resources. I've just gone and read books on writing, like the big picture stuff. Or there are books like Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, which helps break down the resistance that he talks about of procrastination. Or Seth Godin's book, The Practice, which is really good at developing your own process for all forms of content creation, not just writing, but it applies really well to writing.
Okay. I feel like this is a good transition to go more into the gym side of things, because you had talked a little bit about being self-motivated. So when you have like clients that might lack self-motivation or self-discipline or something along those lines, what's kind of the first thing that you try to cover in order to help them understand, like, hey, this is going to be a long process, but you are going to have times of self-motivation, self-discipline at times?
So I like to approach it trying to bypass the struggle with willpower. Okay. So I, for a long time, have focused on a concept about tapping into an aspirational identity as someone who is more fit and active, or to get in touch with aspects of a pre-existing identity that someone has had, whether it's like playing sports in the past, because you're more willing to consistently do things that are in line with who your sense of self is, what your identity is. And every time I mention this is like James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits. I'm like, yeah, actually he does. So it's a great book to really go into that. Because if we're always trying to teach people how to build the discipline, I mean, it sounds great. It's a great sound bite. You need discipline, not motivation, but it doesn't necessarily help that much. So what's an actionable strategy? Well, you try to help foster an identity within that person of someone who is a fit, active person, whatever fit and active may be defined to that individual. And another aspect of this too is with any client that's in front of me, I try to make sure that the experience is one that they enjoy. So someone will develop a consistent habit and behavior if they show up and engage in it long enough for it to become a habit. And I can help facilitate that by making sure that the interpersonal experience, the way that I coach them, the way that they feel about the workouts leaves them feeling positive with better energy, and that they enjoy the experience of us talking, because there's only so much technical training stuff I can talk about, or nutrition or lifestyle behavior stuff I can talk about directly. We've got to fill in the gaps with whether they're a fan of sports or Harry Potter or whatever other popular TV shows or media, or if it's World of Warcraft and Dungeons and Dragons. And my clients run the gamut of that stuff. Or just listening to people's experiences who grew up in a different country, in a different culture, and learning more about that, which it also has to be interesting and positive for us, the coach, because if we're punching long hours with a lot of different clients and we dread those interactions, we will project that energy with everybody, not just the client we don't want to spend time with. But it also leaves us burned out and fatigued. And in order to be able to stay in this long term to help people, we have to enjoy it too. So there's a lot to be said for actually making the hour with the person a fun experience. I coach half of my time in my home studio. I like to know what kind of music my clients like. An old friend of mine trains with me, Eric. He's an accountant. I used to deal poker to him at the old casino. I'll set him on Facebook. Trained with me for a while at the old gym, has come back as a regular client more recently. And he likes metal that is heavier than the metal that I like. So anyway, we put on heavy metalcore style music, and we talk about the Blue Jays and hockey, and make sure that he gets his lifts in, because he doesn't intuitively love to work out.
Mhm.
But we have a great hour. I always look forward to hanging out with him. We're old friends. It's definitely not a burden on my emotional energy to hang out with him, and it makes him want to keep showing up because he has an intuitive understanding of how important his physical health is. But even in his own words, he would probably rather be eating hot dogs than working out.
Okay. So when we are talking about like the story that we tell ourselves, have you found throughout training clients over the years that it's more important to make like a connection with the person first before like trying to uh, kind of like, I'll say, rewire like how they think about the stories that they tell themselves, or jump right into um, something like that?
No, I think you do have to work on the relationship before you, because I like the concept of, the stories that people tell themselves, right? Because these are
Mhm.
narratives and justifications for why they make the choices they do. They are stories. And a lot of times those
Mhm.
stories are no longer serving them as life changes and their desire to change their health changes. It is a lot easier to have those conversations if there is a lot of trust. So you have to go into the process building and earning trust with someone. And I remind my clients the first, second time that they're there with me, I'm like, I'm still a stranger to you. And that kind of puts them at ease, because they realize that you're empathetic to that. But you spend the time asking a lot of questions, learning about them. You avoid going straight into answering and giving a lot of advice. A couple of books that are really good for this, The Coaching Habit by a guy named Michael Stainer. And he has a follow-up called The Advice Trap. I like doing audio. The narrator is intolerable as is the author. I
Okay.
feel bad saying this, but he's got a speech
Mhm.
impediment that makes him hard to understand. And it
Okay.
was one of these things where it's like, dude, you should have just like let someone else read it. But at least The Coaching Habit, great audio listen. They're both good physical reads. And you can take a lot away from this, where we go into this expert mode and we're like, oh yeah, the client tells us something and we have all the answers. So we start giving advice.
Mhm.
It doesn't work very well. I think most people actually know this when you think about it. People are far more likely to act on choices that they make themselves than being told what to do. Even if they're literally paying us to tell them what to do, they're still more likely to do it if they decide. So if you prompt them with a lot of questions to get them to arrive at the choice, then they're more likely to be successful. It also means that we approach every client interaction with the confidence and the trust that that person actually knows themselves better than we do and knows what they need to do. Every client coming in knows that they need to be more active and that they need to eat better. They know that. Sometimes, yes, they do need to work on some of the knowledge and skill base in order to actually implement it. But if we turn around and just simply ask them a lot of questions and allow them to arrive at what's the best solution for each individual problem, instead of telling them ways to get more protein, things to eat protein in their diet if they don't eat enough protein, you ask them what do they think would work for them in terms of when they could eat it, what they could eat it. I promise you, most people will be able to come up with those answers if you guide them through that process. And it leaves them feeling better. You're not being authoritarian in the relationship. They're more likely to like the relationship and want to continue on with you. You build trust, and then you can explore some more of those narratives about challenging someone on maybe pre-existing belief systems that are actually interfering with their progress, while not offending them.
Hmm. Okay. So what are some of the ways to kind of help people to challenge those beliefs once that trust is built? What are some of the ways that is helpful to help challenge some of the ways that we can change those beliefs about ourselves?
Oh, I mean, that's broad because there's so many different ways this can manifest. But again,
Mhm.
it's asking questions about it, right?
Okay.
It's could be something as simple as, the line of questioning. Well, and this comes from a concept called motivational interviewing. So
Okay.
good book to read for any fitness professional.
Hmm.
Try to gather this thought. Asking people something as simple as like, what will happen if you don't change, right? And
Hmm.
then you get that person to kind of look into it and go, well, I'm going to gain more body fat and I'm not going to have the energy to, and so on, right? And you get them to envision what are the outcomes if there's no change versus change? And then again, you ask a lot of questions that get them to describe what they imagine will happen in these scenarios. And oftentimes that can be enough to kind of get the wheels clicking, because in motivational interviewing, you're looking for three things. You're looking for change talk, you're looking for sustained talk, or you're looking for ambivalence. And they're sort of the spectrum. And you want to dial into and encourage change talk and capture it. And then we want to navigate carefully around and understand why people say things that sound like, well, they're not really interested in change or not willing to change, or the things that sort of lie in between. So again, I probably can't do it much justice just here on a podcast, but I encourage anybody listening. I mean, if you're a coach, these books are essential reading. If you're a person who is yourself working through this process, well, one is, if you do have a coach or are looking for a coach, run what your potential coach does through the filter of what I've just described. And two, go read these things for yourself, because it may be enlightening to look at what are your belief systems and habits that are holding you back. And you can ask those same questions of yourself. So, and it also works for coaches. We're coaches, we're terrible clients. But if we can be alert to the things that we struggle with, because we're supposed to be the experts of the client in front of us, but we don't always follow our own advice, you can become a little bit more alert to that too, because we also have to sustain our own emotional well-being, our own health, our own energy. I am very good about the boundary of sleep, but not every coach is, right? So imagine you get all these like over caffeinated, underslept coaches. If they could turn around and tackle that one thing, how much could that potentially enhance their career and their ability to be present and do high quality work for their clients?
This is true. So transitioning from here, since you have a lot of content that you create and everything, how are some of the ways that you deal with people that might talk negatively about like some of your content, or maybe something that's misinterpreted?
Yeah, that's actually a really awesome question. First of all, you have to be comfortable with the idea that your message and your media is not going to be for everyone. And I think you can be so damned bland with your messaging that it offends no one and that it really doesn't make an impact. I don't subscribe to the antithesis of that, which is to say, pick some sort of ridiculously polarizing position and then draw in the haters and magnify like the whole, like any attention is good attention. Your Liver King types, or your carnivore crazies, or some of the more militant vegans, or like any extreme end of any ideological spectrum, right? I'm not interested in that, because that stuff comes with stress. And if you get negative comments, yeah, it actually can be stressful and unpleasant. Sometimes it comes in the form of like anonymous trolls, or maybe it's just someone in the industry who is just starts to attack you. So there are ways to deal with it. I mean, first of all, it's good to be aware that this stuff's going to happen. And therefore, you already have a set of rules in how you're going to deal with it if it should arise. It's about not being emotionally reactive, taking a breath, pausing and going, okay, let me just like see what's this person's intent. And the person may still, maybe it's a miscommunication. Maybe their intent isn't malicious. Maybe they're the one having a bad day. So on one hand, you can turn around and be charitable in your interpretation of their intentions and kill them with kindness. Or if you get really like anonymous, malicious trolling type stuff, you delete the comments, you block that person, you move on. We are not, no one is entitled to harass us, engage with malicious intent, and for us to then give them a voice or a platform on our media. And that's really important. So you have to protect your emotional well-being. You can't use that to create an echo chamber around any sort of dissent or differing of opinion. There are people in the industry who have developed reputations as totally intolerant to anything other than someone who like hugs their nuts and doesn't worship and agree with them, right? And you don't want to do that either. Social media does give you some tools. I do occasionally, if I put up a post and a lot of people interact with, there's always going to be someone. I say a lot of positive things about gym environments, and then there's always some idiot that comes in and says, "Oh, gyms are dirty and toxic, and they're blah blah, blah all this sort of crap," right? And it's some little nothing account. So I usually look at those and I kind of go, "Okay, this is not helping." I could engage and fuck with this person. That's not a good use of my time either. So I usually just kind of restrict that account. That way I don't block them. They can yammer away and no one will ever see it again. And it's out of sight, out of mind for me. And then just delete stupid comments. I don't believe in deleting stuff that disagrees with you. You have to be careful. I've had a couple scenarios. There was a group of people who were harassing a buddy of mine. They were really attacking him. And so they caught wind that I disapproved of this behavior, and I sort of like called this behavior out in general as what it was, harassment, right? Just they disagree with him. Anyway, so they do this game where they'll go in and they'll comment with the intent to gaslight you, expecting that you'll delete the comment. They've got the screenshots. And then if you delete the comment or block any of the trolling, then they'll post you up in their stories and they'll drive more harassment to you. And this is a form of harassment and bullying online. It absolutely is, right? No matter the justification of how people do it. But you want to be alert to these kind of tactics, because sometimes it's best just to ignore people and just kind of breathe and go, well, no one's going to really notice this. But if you draw a lot of attention to it, the whole Barbra Streisand effect, it then turns around and blows up into a bigger deal. So instead of going to war with these type of people, sometimes you look for the nuance, you look for the people who, hey, it's just probably a disagreement in philosophy. You can have private conversations, and oftentimes you can come out the other side of it and everybody's better off. Meanwhile, if someone is a malicious type, because again, this tribe has some of those, you block them, to hell with them, don't concern yourself, whatever they want to do. And I don't tolerate, if anyone has ever lured into my page. I had this sort of thing happen recently where an individual just got really nasty about something I said that was positive. And then she lured a coworker of hers in and he started in. Anyway, so then he posted me up in his story, and it's just like, holy shit, guys, this is ridiculous. I got an apology from the original person because that person realized that this is sort of like something about how they interact with things. And then the individual who like owned the company that they were involved with is someone I'm also in contact with. He got lured in, and he and I had a very nuanced, respectful private chat after the fact. And I let him know that my displeasure at the behavior of one of his employees that I consider to be bullying and harassment. He's like, yeah, that's not how we do things. And I'll go talk to him and whatnot. And again, it's just about being thoughtful, nuanced about it, and understanding that, yeah, if you come out guns a-blazing, you may actually do a little bit more harm in the big picture. But I still think for most people, this stuff isn't frequent unless you're really looking for it. And you're usually better off just blocking, removing, getting rid of the really malicious stuff, and then being charitable in your interpretations of the intent of someone who probably disagrees, opening the dialogue. Maybe you find common ground, you engage respectfully, and be careful about doing things that will inflame the situation, because, you know, I've had friends who've been stressed out for days and completely incapable of focusing on anything else because some sort of situation had spilled over into something really bad. And, you know, again, some tribe of people online, a buddy of mine posted something about seed oils and the evidence and research that seed oils aren't that bad. And there's this giant narrative amongst a massive community online that seed oils are this demonic, malevolent thing. And so I said to him, he was really upset because some really nasty people were sort of like attacking him and driving a lot of people into his profile. And he was really stressed out about it. And I said, is that really a hill to die on? Do you really care enough about actually seed oils? Because like, I understand the evidence, but I'm not interested in, quote, defend. It's like high fructose corn syrup. Research actually is really clear that, okay, it's not worse than, you know, any other form of sugar. And we know that like massive overconsumption of it leads to massive overconsumption of calories, which then leads to body fat gain. But I've never once felt compelled to defend high fructose corn syrup. There's some really like evidence-based people, like maybe Mike Isertel might go and touch on that, or Spencer Nadolsky. Great. Spencer loves to, you know, talk about, you know, I've got a diet drink here, sparkling ice thing. I like them, 0 calorie. And he talks about like aspartame and artificial sweeteners a lot. And that makes people fucking crazy. Like, holy shit, crazy. You know, here I am enjoying this, no issues whatsoever. But I'm not interested in, like, my style of posting is not to defend the diet drinks. They do that because you're going to attract crazy, awful people who are going to say insane shit on your social media. it sometimes is just going, you pick your battles, because if you don't have the emotional bandwidth to like lean into this stuff, and you like, if you thrive on it, hell, go nuts, create controversy, I don't care. But if you do not have the emotional bandwidth, there are certain things that just simply aren't bloody worth it. And my friend agreed with me. He's like, you know what, you're right. Like, defending seed oils is really not a big priority in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah. You kind of answered my question with that. Like, I had a question I was going to ask, but you kind of answered it with that story. But I almost feel like sometimes we can kind of get attached to a belief that we might have, and we want to defend that belief. And it almost like I almost feel like it's part of like our ego is us being right about that belief. So how can we kind of help detach ourselves from um, that belief and say, hey, you know what, even though I'm just defending seed oils, I know that you touched on this just a little bit just now with this story, but I'm wondering if you have anything like further that you can go into with, I'm going to kind of detach myself from this and build up my emotional bandwidth or my emotional stillness, I could say.
I like the word stillness. Ryan Holiday's book, Stillness is the Key, really good one.
Mhm.
It starts with being aware that these are still all belief systems in a sense, even, things that seem overwhelmingly supported by the research, because nothing's ever quote proven. That's not even the scientific method. There are a lot of people within the evidence-based community that are so malevolent and dogmatic and inflexible about their belief systems, about the evidence, that they don't shift as the evidence shows nuance, right? And then you also get a lot of people who are purporting to be evidence-based who are blatantly misrepresenting things. And that could include people with a PhD behind their name, only, for someone with a lens for critical thinking kind of go, this sounds a little dubious. And I'm not going to name any names, but there are plenty of them floating around in the popular ethos, and a few in the fitness industry. Most of the PhDs in the fitness industry are actually authentically very smart, qualified, capable people, like Lane Norton, like Dr. Mike Isertel, et cetera. So it's not attaching yourself to and your identity. Here's the key. It's not making any particular belief system part of your identity. The people who are devoted to carnivore dieting or intermittent fasting or keto or veganism all make those things very much part of their identity. It sometimes shows up in literally their social media name, right? And I respect anybody who is a lifestyle vegan, right? Because I think veganism is one of these things that usually comes from a moral, ethical standpoint. Sometimes they become a bit militant and intolerant of anybody else. And sometimes they start saying things like it is the healthiest thing. That's actually not well supported by the research on it. You can be quite healthy, but you need to make sure you're filling in the nutritional deficiency gaps that are missing from our more historically omnivorous diet. But anybody who claims that we are supposed to be vegans, as much as anybody who claims that we're supposed to be purely carnivore, is dealing in ideological belief, not scientific evidence, right? So if someone listening is like really diehard in one of those camps, you're not going to like that I just said that. But for everybody else, I hope it illustrates the point that you have these people who have very dogmatic belief systems, and then just be alert to when you start to defend, and this is sort of a paraphrase of something that a guy named Naval Ravikant says. He's a philosopher, angel investor, corporate tech sort of guy. Irrelevant about Naval, but he says that he stopped believing in isms when he would find himself defending positions within that tribe that he didn't agree with. And that definitely applies to political, social, ideological stuff. But it also applies to nutrition. It applies to training. You get people who are, everything CrossFit is the only way, or everything PRI, or everything, any other like training ideology that has a name to it. And maybe I just have always been more of like take pieces, the whole, like, I can't remember the exact quote from Bruce Lee, but take what is useful and discard the rest. And that's always sort of been my philosophy. So therefore I expose myself to a broader range of ideas, including running things through the filter of the more respected evidence-based people in the industry, who have shown a history of changing their position on things as the understanding of nutritional sciences and exercise physiology have changed. Someone like a Brad Schoenfeld is a really good example of that, right? Preeminent researcher on muscle hypertrophy. He's on the forefront of it. He's not someone who's trying to prove his theories. He's someone who's trying to disprove his theories. And if he fails in doing so, then it increases the likelihood that some of those theories about muscle building, are pretty solid. So I think it's just surrounding yourself with a diverse array of ideas and people, avoiding being tribal or dogmatic in your belief systems, and just taking a step back and actually making sure that you don't dig in a position so hard that you can't come back out the other side of it, right?
That makes sense. Yeah, I feel like that's a really good place to kind of leave off and not just keep beating that. So, Andrew, thank you for coming on here today, just kind of taking
Pleasure.
some time out of your day. It was very helpful to me, and I hope anyone that listens to it, it's going to be helpful for them and they'll be able to take something away from it. So if anyone is looking to kind of like find your work or things like that, is it okay if we ask just where we can find you, things like that?
Sure. So all roads lead through Instagram. So Andrew Coates Fitness, Coates. My website's linked to my bio. It is www.andrewcoatesfitness.com. Any articles that I have published on my website are there, or anything external, the T Nation stuff, the muscle and fitness stuff, I'll always link it through there or like share it in real time. It'll always be on my website and I'll always be shared on my social media. And instead of like directing people to my podcast, sure, it's the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I like reminding the people listening here, if you've been listening to Shawn, then turn around. If you haven't given him a review, go give him a review. Like, you take time to schedule guests, prepare, do research, that takes a bit of extra time. And there's some stuff behind the scenes that, whether it's editing or simply publishing it, making notes on it, you name it, it takes some time. And there's a lot of good things that can come out of these interactions with people across the industry. It's been very worthwhile to me with my podcast, but this is a little way for anybody who's been listening to you, who gets a lot of value out of this, enhances their career, to do something kind for you who is putting in all this effort. So go do something kind for Shawn. Go provide a really good review on iTunes or wherever you listen, and come find me on Instagram. Shoot me a message if you have questions. I will always respond to messages. I always appreciate them. I'll always take the time to answer.
That's very helpful. That's very kind of you to say for me, because I am really bad at asking for that kind of stuff. So awesome. All right. Thank you, Andrew. All right.
I appreciate it, Shawn.